I am going to explain to you how that there are two more separate powers in our system, in our lawful system. In the democracy, we just have the three powers acting as checks against the other to bring about a balance. They haven't brought the balance. So when we go back and read our history and discover how the founders put the system together, we find that there are two more separate powers that are just fantastic powers, and they're the most powerful separate powers in the entire system. And of course, I talked about the grand jury and the trial jury over here, but I did not bring out how that the grand jury and the trial jury, what they are separate powers, and that they have the authority to be a check against the government. They have a check against that. They're a check against that monster. But I'm going to concentrate on this chart over here for this segment of this TV production. Now, the grand jury goes over here. The trial jury goes over here. Now, if you will remember the schematic that we had here on the difference between a democracy and a republic, the people were up above the Constitution, and that's the way it is here. Well, the grand jury is a separate power above the Constitution. The president, the congressmen, the senators, the judiciary, the judges, all of those hundreds of federal judges in this country, they're all below the Constitution. The grand jury is above the Constitution. The petit jury, the trial jury, they are above the Constitution. Why? Because it is made up of we the people up here. They're the ones who serve on grand juries, they're the ones who serve on trial juries, and they are the creators of the Constitution. So they're not going to put themselves below the Constitution. Now, if we the people up here, if we don't know about our authority, if we do not understand our proper position in this order of authority, this pecking order, then the grand jury is down here on the floor someplace. It isn't even on the picture here. The grand jury is down there on the floor. That's where it's functioning today. This is not what we have today in this nation. The grand jury isn't up here. Although in Montana back in the decade of the 80s, we had 4 years out of the 10 years of the 80s where the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Justice Department in Montana, was unable to get a grand jury indictment of anyone for tax evasion. Why? Very simple. Because we went on television and we taught the people of Montana about their power on grand juries and the trial juries. And it was very, very effective. And this video that is being produced right now is going to be very, very effective because we're going to go right into the living room of Joe Sixpack, and he, for the first time in his life, he's going to understand that he is in a position here where he can be a check. Why is the grand jury a separate power? Very simple. You take all of the people in the executive branch of government. I understand there are over 20 million people now who work for the federal government in one way or another, and most of them are in the executive branch, the administrative branch of government. You take all of those millions of public servants. You take all of the congressmen. There's 435 congressmen. There's 100 U.S. senators. Take all of their staff. Put them all together with all of those judges on the federal bench at the district court level, the appellate level, and the U.S. Supreme Court. You can take all of that conglomeration of government, put them all together, and you cannot find the power. They don't have the authority to indict anybody. What is an indictment? They didn't teach you that in the government school because they didn't want you to know. In the Declaration of Independence, again, it says, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. deriving their just powers. Where do they get their unjust powers? They get their unjust powers also from the consent of the governed, but they are getting unjust powers from a misinformed or disinformed public out there. The people are not informed, and so they are giving their consent. We have grand juries that are not functioning up here where they belong. They're down here because they don't know their authority. Now, suppose that we have one of us, one of our countrymen here. He is a very productive American. He's a small businessman, perhaps. He's got a machine shop or something. He's a craftsman. He takes great pride in being a productive American. And I want you to pay particular attention to the fact that the IRS, they never harass the unproductive. It is only the productive in this country who are being harassed. And the productive, you see, are a minority. You see, you've got all of these government servants down here. You have all of the welfare. You have all of the people that are getting a government check, and there's over 50%, they tell us, that now get some kind of a government subsidy or whatever. The productive individual is a minority. You are not going to be able to control anything with your vote on election day if you're a productive American. It is not going to happen. So, we have a productive individual, and he's up here. He's one of us. And he, at some point, decides that he has suffered enough. He says, every April 15th, I have to write a check to the Internal Revenue Service, which is nothing more than a fine, a penalty for being a productive American. And he says, I've had enough. I've seen all of this waste. I have seen in my local newspaper about the Air Force buying $2,000 toilet seats and $5,000 coffee makers, $350 hammers that he can buy at the hardware store for $10. He says, I just can't afford this kind of government anymore. And he quits filing. He gets himself informed. He gets himself a soapbox, and he gets up on the soapbox and he tells his fellow Americans, say, hey, we have a criminal government. It goes for 4 or 5 years, and he becomes more active. He's doing the radio talk shows. He's writing letters to the editor. He's passing out pamphlets and books. And he gets the attention of the Internal Revenue Service, and they're down here in the executive branch of government. They say, man, we've got to silence this fellow up here. I call him Mr. A. He's a grade A American, and he's up here, and he's speaking out, which is his right and his duty. He's speaking out. The IRS, they go to the U.S. Attorney's Office, who is also down here in this executive branch of government, and they decide that they want to prosecute Mr. A, but they cannot prosecute Mr. A without the consent of the governed. So they have to come up to the grand jury and get the consent of our representatives on the grand jury. They're supposed to be representing us, not the IRS, not the government. They're supposed to be representing us. Now, when your state legislature, when the Congress, when they pass rules and regulations, say your state legislature, they create traffic laws. What do? Do they just write them in the book and forget them? No. When they write a rule or a statute, they send out their employees. They send out the highway patrol, don't they, to enforce the statutes that they create. The speed limits and all the rest, right? Now, whenever they write law, they send out enforcement people. When we the people wrote a law, the Constitution, who did we send out there to enforce the law we wrote? That's what these people are there for.